This is Geek Gab with your host, me, Daddy Warpig. We are back, Geek Gab, for Monday, July 27th, 2026. And today we are going to be discussing, we welcome our guest, Michael F Kane, talking about his new book, The Witch of Hobmont Pass, currently in Kickstarter on the site known as Kickstarter, in its last week. And I'm going to be doing my best, my level best, my best of my best to encourage you to take a look at it and maybe jump in on it the same way I, your host, have. And I don't have any news that I can think of. Oh, yeah, just one piece of news. So, Halo Campaign Evolved came out this week, and it looks like it's awful, just terrible, which is kind of what we expected from modern Xbox, because the way Xbox had been being run, they've had people running it and developing for it. I just, you know, to quote The Green Mile, I'm tired, boss. I don't want any more of these video games where they take something great, all the things they added to it made it worse, all the things they took away made it worse, and everything they changed made it worse. And you can point to the graphics and say, but hey, it's running in Unreal 5, and that's all shiny and new. And you can say that that made it better in that sense, but the gameplay is worse. The NPCs they added are worse. They took out all the little touches that made the world come alive. Like when you go and jump off a hill, the individual Marines who were riding in the Warthog behind you used to react to that. And they gave the world that little added feeling of life. And they no longer do. So what does it matter if the textures are higher resolution, or if there's fancy new shaders or lighting systems, if it feels like a sterile laboratory where you're surrounded by robots? It's just a horribly done game, or a horribly done remaster. And I can't tell you how many times I've played Halo, probably over 20. I'm sure there's people who played it more. I'm not trying to say that I've played Halo more than anybody else in the world. I know that's not true. But I've probably played through the campaign over a dozen times, maybe as many as 20 times or more. And I'm just not interested in playing through a game that isn't Halo. Even the redone version of Halo for the collection that came out so many years ago at least kept most of those little touches. They screwed up the checkpoint before the last run to the bomber, but they kept all of the touches that made it come alive. And oh yeah, all of the Covenant, they speak English. They don't speak the Covenant language. There's just every single thing they did in this game speaks of people who had no idea what Halo was. And all the changes they made were made by people ignorant of what the game originally is. Kind of like people who made second edition D&D. But anyways, our guest today is Michael F. Kane. We want to welcome him to the show. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you doing tonight?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me on tonight.
So your last series was a sci-fi Western, and this new series is a fantasy, not so much a Western, but a frontier fantasy, more along the lines of, say, The Last of the Mohicans, or one of those other books set on the very early frontier of the West. Is that correct? That's what I've gathered. Is that correct?
Yes. It's this book is going to be taking place in a very Appalachian-inspired settings. So rugged hills, deep forest, mist-filled hollows, and things that go bump in the night, lurking around in the woods.
And it's more horror oriented than
a little bit. It has to be. If an Appalachian inspired story has to be a little weird. I wouldn't say that it's like really horror oriented. It's you know how Jaws is scary until you see the shark. I think it's kind of like that. That there's a period of suspense where it's what's going on. You know, what is it that's out there in the woods harrying this expedition? And I think that's a little suspenseful. Uh, I it's horror as a secondary genre, not a primary, if that makes sense. It's more heroic than horror, if that makes sense.
yeah.
More
I
heroic
see
than
what you're saying.
purely gothic. There's a gothic sense to the setting. Definitely some inspiration from like Sleepy Hollow. What's who wrote that? I can't remember who wrote that all of a sudden, but that from some of the frontier gothic. But it's more heroic than that. I want this to be I've described it this book as I want people to read it, go, "Oh, I really like that, and I really want my 12 or 14-year-old nephew or son to read it," because it's, very steeped in American places and American thought and muskets and guns and men fighting things in the woods, right? Which is a lot better than the junk they're trying to make most boys read these days. So
And
it's definitely a very big emphasis on the heroism more so than the horror, if that makes sense. And I think that kind of differentiates it a little bit from a lot of horror, which has more of a little more hopeless feel sometimes, not always, but
Brian Renninger says Washington Irving wrote.
Washington Irving. That's it. Yes, it left me the second I mentioned it.
Um, one of the things about the frontier is, of course, Daniel Boone, the old pioneer spirit, um, taking a you know taking your family, moving out uh, into trackless land and making
So
your own house.
yeah, so how I got into wanting to write this series, and this is going to be the first of a series. Um, a couple of years ago on Twitter, I asked a question, and it went kind of semi-viral in the kind of right-leaning arts writing spaces. And I asked that, I said, I mentioned that most fantasy is distinctly European coded, and asked what an American coded fantasy would look like. Now, I had ideas in mind already, but I really wanted to see what the Twitter hive mind came up with, and it was a fabulous thread, a fabulous post, because there were people that were giving very specific answers, with Edgar Rice Burroughs and Howard and Conan and things like that. And then there were people that were delving more into the philosophical side of things, bringing up the frontier, the Western being the distinctly American fantasy, and then other people rightly linking science fiction as American fantasy. And so there was a lot of really good just conversation there. And I was still writing one of the later books of After Moses. I hadn't quite started the final book, I think, then. And so I really started thinking about that, and it just started percolating while I was finishing up After Moses, that the next thing I really wanted to do was something that was just deeply American. And what I settled on as one of the primary American ideas and myths is the myth of the frontier. Right now, we're most familiar with it in the particular distillation that is the Western, right? That's the genre that really most people are familiar with. It deal with a certain aspect of the American frontier. It's a later aspect, a later time period. But that idea, the frontier is deeply ingrained in American thought. It's exactly what you were talking about. It's that idea that you can leave the safety of the cities, you can go out into the wilds. It will be dangerous. There will be men that will try and kill you. There will be animals that will try and kill you. You might starve, but if you persevere, you can carve out a slice of civilization for yourself and for your family. And maybe, just maybe, you pave the way to make it safer for those that follow you. Right? That is a deeply ingrained American idea. And you can obviously see how the Western really just lays into that, and in that later era and time period. And it is kind of funny that, in that original Twitter thread, how people brought up uh, both science fiction and Edgar Rice Burroughs, because I think there really is really something there, in that science fiction uh, is another very deeply American genre in its thought. Obviously, there are British writers that really get it going. But you go to Edgar Rice Burroughs, and what does he do? Is he takes a Western setting, and I think they're in Arizona when John Carter flees into this cave, and he goes from one red desert to another red desert on Mars. Right. Edgar Rice Burroughs identified very early on that the frontier spirit, now that the frontier was closed, moves to space. And so you get space as the final frontier. And obviously not all science fiction is related to frontiers anymore, but a lot of that early pulp and exploration focused science fiction is frontier fiction, which again is steeped in that American thought. So, coming out of the science fiction Western, which has a little bit of that in it, I wanted to move on to telling some frontier stories. So how I really decided to settle on this series would be a series of books that are shorter, because my After Moses books are pretty long. They're fat sci-fi space opera, big long books. So for shorter books, more pulp length, so that 50 to 60,000 words, more of them, that they would be little snapshots or love letters to the American frontier and American landscapes. And my intention is to tell kind of a generational story. That the name of the series is the Lockridge Passage. Lockridge is the name of the family, and it starts with a father and a son. The father is a general, is a war hero, and he's tasked with opening these passes in the mountains to the west, these very Appalachian mountain styled hills, and he's taking his 12-year-old son with him. And the story alternates between this first story alternates between the father and the son. And so you have the adult half of the story where he's worried about logistics and keeping people alive, and the son is on the adventure of a lifetime, and it's a coming of age story. And so I do hope it has a wide appeal for that age range, because I do want people to read it and go, man, I know a 12-year-old boy that really needs to read this and just think about adventure and big things, and not just their video games and whatever else. Think big things. And but I intend with the series is that it'll take place over generations. That little John Lockridge at 12, he'll grow up on the frontier, get married, have some kids, and I'm going to move westward through different American inspired landscapes and have all these different adventures. Now, I say fantasy, and that I'm treating all of the, I'm just bulk importing American folk stories and cryptids into the setting. Which means starting in the Appalachians, if you know anything about the stories in the Appalachians, that things are always weird, things are always a little creepy. There's always the thing going bump in the night. And I don't remember if it's 5 or 6 different, actual Appalachian cryptids that I mentioned. I mentioned a few of them make an appearance, and I mentioned a whole bunch more, but it was definitely a lot of fun doing a lot of research into the stories and creatures of the region. So I'm planning on spending a few books in the Appalachians, because there's that region deserves more than one book. But this first one, I'm pretty pleased with it. I think it's a good little adventure. Like I said, it's not a super long book. It's more of a pulp length book. And yeah, it's on Kickstarter right now. So I definitely want people to back it. The main reason it's on Kickstarter, and stop me if you have a question, I'm just rambling at this point, but the main reason it's on Kickstarter is I want illustrations. I want some classic adventure style illustrations. I found an artist. He's on Twitter, Jordan Holt. He has a this kind of he's done some comic books. He's done this comedic retelling of the myth of Theseus in 3 volumes, and it's pretty good. I had that and really enjoyed it, and turned out he'd read the first one of my books, and we just kind of had a conversation one day that it'd be kind of fun to get to work together someday. And it really just turned out that the very next project I was going to work on, he was going to be the right man. If you look at his Twitter profile, he says he's from Appalachia and that he's got 200 years of family in the region. And so the other thing was that he was, at the time when I was really planning all this out, he had mentioned that he was trying to move away from digital art. Those three volumes of that Theseus comic that I talked about. The first one, I believe, is all digital. And then by the last one, all of the line art is real ink. And I believe the coloring is still digital in that one. He's starting work on a new comic now that's going to be ink and watercolor, I think, which is a really neat combination. And so he was talking about how he really wanted to go back to physical, because physical art forced him to get better. It's not that there's not a place for digital. Digital's great. You can do amazing things with it, but you can always just hit Control Z and undo that mistake. Whereas with ink, that's a little more complicated. When you've got an ink brush and you're drawing this monster in the woods, the mistakes have to be dealt with and become part of the character of it. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, I really want you to do the art for this. So there's several of the early illustrations are you can see them on the Kickstarter. They're definitely worth checking out. I told him, I don't know if you're familiar with these. They were published in the 70s to late 80s, the Great Illustrated Classics. Are you familiar with those by any chance?
The Great Illustrated Classics. Were those the small ones with illustrations on? They were like condensed
yes
versions.
Like these right here.
Yeah, we had
yes.
several of those.
Yeah, and all of them are really condensed. Some of them are really just retellings, because you can't condense Moby Dick to 30,000 words, right? It's just a straight retelling. And there's people that hate condensed novels. I think they're great for younger readers, because I think that, look, the odds that every young reader is going to get around to all of those classics that are really part of the what shaped our culture is really low. I mean, we don't read as much as we used to. And so even if they just get that introduction, that condensed version, I think it's great. But anyway, the thing about them is they had an illustration, ink illustrations, every page, which, I mean, I can't afford every single page, obviously. But I actually looked, they have several different there were several different artists through the series, and the main one was actually a Marvel artist. I can't remember his name offhand, but I gave that as a reference, to kind of like a style reference to Jordan, because I was like, they have this really nice, just traditional, adventurous feel to them. And after he posted the first illustration to Twitter for the first time, one of the first comments was, "Oh, that reminds me of the Great Illustrated Classics." And we were both like, yes, that is hitting exactly what we wanted, that somebody keyed into the exact reference I gave them. So that's the main reason to do it. Kickstarter is illustrations and art cost money. As far as indie writers go, I sell pretty good number of books. I'm doing pretty good. I sell more books every year, but and I'm reinvesting a lot into this one because I want this to be a really just nice book. But yes, exactly. Yeah. I remember reading about the Virginia. I've never read it. But I need more capital. I just want more capital because I want more illustrations. So I started the campaign promising 10. I was going to pay for 10 illustrations myself. And I want to do 21, which is a full page and a half page for each chapter, plus one for the prologue. If it gets to 7,000, I'll do that. And I'm sitting real close to 6. And I'm kind of starting to get another uptick this week as we're closing in on that last week, because Kickstarters traditionally do a little bit more on their final week. So we'll see if I get enough of a bump to make that happen. It'd be nice. If I don't quite hit that 7,000, I think I'm up to 16 now that I've promised I'm going to do. So looking forward to it. It's really a lot of fun working with a talented artist. One of those things is you get something back and you're like, oh, that's really good. I'm going to change the description in the book to match what you drew because that's better than what I wrote. Yeah, I think Roy Crinkle was the name that I remembered. I didn't know that Jack Kirby did any of those. I had no idea. I didn't remember reading that.
Brian Renninger says a lot of Marvel artists and illustrated classics: Jack Kirby, Roy Crinkle, Gray Morrow, and more.
Wow. Okay, that's cool.
So I'm reading that because the version of this that goes out on the podcast doesn't have video.
Okay.
I wanted to say this for those people that were confused about what I was talking about, musket westerns versus traditional westerns. The time period that musket westerns take place in is pre-industrial revolution, and there's a lot of big changes that happens in, because that's pre-1800s or early 1800s. So there's no factories, there's much less surplus of goods, there's no railroads, no big factory towns, no assembly lines. Everything's made by individual craftsmen. And even like Napoleonic arms or armies and tactics are all off in the future. It's redcoats marching in line because the guns weren't even, in many cases, weren't even rifled yet.
Right.
Although that comes into, this is the time period where rifling starts to be introduced. And so guns are very, very inaccurate, and they have much less range as a result. And so if you're in this kind of situation where there's much less good and there's no railroads, there is no, there's no Sears catalog that you could order from to get goods shipped out to you. You can't order you can't go to a store, even on a frontier town. They had those dry goods stores where you could go and buy a gun and buy ammunition and buy shirts and buy things like that. Everything has to be more or less handmade, even if it's handmade back in the East. The East is much closer in terms of physical location, but you have to always ride there on horseback or in wagon. There's no really fast transportation. Um, and it is so everything on the frontier is hand sold and handmade, and there is no um, there is help is very, very far away. Additional goods are very, very far away. You have to hunt for all the stuff you get, or trade for it when a trader comes nearby with whatever you have got. Um, and so things are a lot chancier. They're a lot riskier. And then there are uh, the woods on the other side of the Appalachians were heavy, were thick. You weren't on the Great Plains or in we have these visions of the John Ford Desert that people are walking through, but they weren't like the big, thick, dark woods that you're trying to cut trees down and drag stumps out and carve a farm out of the woods. It's a different time, and that's why musket westerns are different than your post Civil War classic western movies, the Clint Eastwood era, or all those other gunslinger eras.
It's a fun era to write about. I did a lot more research for this book than I usually do for my books. I read 3 books in preparation and had to constantly go, oh, what's the correct term? What's the correct period accurate term for this? And go look it up. So, I mean, it doesn't technically take place in our world. I have another map because I wanted to have some flexibility to make up places and things like that. But the setting is ripped straight from the time period. So what you're talking about with muskets, it's still primarily muskets. Rifles are beginning to come out, and the rifle was the king of the frontier. The Pennsylvania long rifle and the Kentucky long rifle, they absolutely changed how a frontiersman could live, because with a musket you have a range of about 100 yards, right? But you're still shooting with a smooth bore and round shot, and so can you hit that deer at 100 yards every time? No. You just absolutely can't. Whereas as soon as those Pennsylvania and Kentucky long rifles come out and start working their way westward into the hills, suddenly you can hit a deer somewhat reliably at 200 yards, which is just absolutely life changing on the frontier. And so, yeah, guns have to be a big part of any kind of frontier story. Uh, in some ways, the different stages of the American frontiers, you can chart it to the history of the firearm, starting with muskets in the very earliest era, moving on to the early rifles by the Revolutionary War, and so on and so forth. One of the fun things that I do in this story is a hero needs a hero's weapon in a fantasy, even if it's an American fantasy. And the American fantasy doesn't have a wizard with a staff; it has a man with a gun. And so one of the primary other main characters is this very Daniel Boone style um, hunter, this mountain man. Only there's some hints that he's a little more professional at hunting the things that go bump in the night, but he has this one of a kind, a little bit out of time weapon. It's a few decades ahead of schedule. He has this revolving rifle that plays this big part in this plot. This early weapon that can shoot multiple shots, made by this master craftsman. So it's very kind of playing into some fantasy things, but moving it into that American setting of the gun being the king of the frontier. So definitely some fun stuff to write about. One of the books I read to prepare for this was the Jack Tales. And the Jack Tales were collected by a folklorist. I think it's in the 1920s. The book may have been published in the 30s, but he went to, based on a tip, he gave a lecture talking about oral traditions or something like this. And a someone who was is in the lecture came up to him afterwards and says, you need to come back home with me. You need to see this. And so he went back to this one county in North Carolina where these oral traditions of their Jack Tales is what they were, that had been preserved from about an early 1800s as kind of their the about the time period that was being preserved from, because everybody in the county had learned them from a specific guy that was born in like the 1820s, and he had learned them from somebody else. Anyway, there's all this stuff in the book, but the Jack Tales is just a collection of these stories. A Jack Tale is not a unique thing to America. They came from Europe originally. Jack and the Beanstalk is the most well-known Jack Tale. There's a bunch of others. Jack frequently is killing giants. The European Jack is very heroic. Well, Jack comes to America, and Jack changes his character and becomes kind of a lazy trickster hero. He wins and kills giants and things by guile. And it was a great book to read because it had this preserved dialect from an earlier era, but also just really captured that some of the Scots-Irish stuff. So I read that. Totally worth reading if you're interested in that kind of stuff at all. I read that and really, used it to base some of the characters' light dialect. Was making notes. Okay, this kind of grammar structure, he uses these words in the situation like this to try and have that Scots-Irish kind of character a little more authentic. But yeah, that was one of the books I read. That was fabulous. That was a lot of working through to get through it, but it was definitely a lot of fun. But that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to do for this, is to just infuse it with as much Americanism as possible. So not only did I read that, I wrote and incorporated a Jack Tale into the story because it was just such a great thing to work with from the setting, and the air is just steeped in these, Appalachian hollows.
Is that book hard to come by?
No, it's in print. The current, if you just search the Jack Tales, you'll find it. There's a couple different ones. The current covers are ugly, just ugly modern art on the front, but that's okay. If you have any interest in like Appalachian style things at all, you're going to like it. But the one of the fun things in it that I really appreciated, because it still has the foreword from the folklorist that collected them, is he says that you should pass these on to your kids. He says, but what you should not do is you should not read them to them. What you should do is you should read a tale multiple times, and then you should try and tell it to your kids out loud without the help of the story. He says, because without the help of the book. He says, because this is an oral history. The proper way to therefore transmit it is as an oral history. So that was part of that idea of transmitting, and in the process of transmitting an oral tale, things change. There's embellishments happen, and so that kind of idea was what inspired me to go, no, I'm gonna tell my own. I'm gonna base it on a couple of them, kind of mix some ideas, mix some structure in. And so there's a short Jack Tale mixed in that's kind of relevant to the plot. Yeah, neat time period. That 1700s setting. But I get to play with history. That's another thing I'm going to do in this series, is I'm going to play with history a little bit. There's some things I'll condense a little, some things I'll shift around in time, make it a little bit of an alt history setting. But so far, I think it's pretty good. I'm pretty proud of it, and I'm looking forward to. I've got quite a few people have read it at this point, and everybody's enjoyed it so far. So we'll hopefully the broader audience will like it as well.
It's now one of the things I was wondering about, uh, the general who is a hero
Hmm.
was fighting in a war across the sea.
So the big kind of twist is that the Republic of Colombia, which is the stand-in for the United States, playing on Lady Columbia, who's kind of this early American personification, the goddess Columbia, um, who we kind of had for the first century and a half, and eventually she gets replaced with Uncle Sam much later. I think Lady Columbia is much better because she fits in with the Greek motifs and the classical motifs of Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, is named after her. So the Republic of Colombia was founded a little bit earlier, and there's a war that ended in the 1770s. I kind of have set up a kind of a proto World War with the European powers that the Republic of Colombia kind of played a little part on the outside of. So kind of a musket led World War. Uh, there's a couple reasons I do that. One of them is that the British, who are part of the victorious party, and they're kind of leading up the treaty that is involved with it, and
So
the ending of it. Go ahead.
if you'll excuse me, it's sort of like the Napoleonic Wars, like 50 years early.
A little earlier and a little more two sides ish, if that makes sense.
Okay,
Um,
but I mean that level of
yes,
you know.
yes, that level of parties involved, and one of the things that the British do in the ending of the war is that the British Queen uh, forces into the treaty the abolition of the slave trade, which, of course, the British abolitionists were already hard at work in the 1770s with, you know, William Wilberforce was already, hard at work trying to get that done. And the main reason I do that is I don't want to relitigate the American Civil War and slavery and all those things. And so I'm forcing an ending to it earlier via us being part of that treaty, and that's kind of dealt with as it will still allow me to have, freed slaves and things like that, but I'm more interested in the frontier than dealing with the South and slavery and things like that. And so it's kind of a change timeline thing that I deal with. It comes up very quickly, and I'll have to work out what that means, because that does mean some things. I can imagine those states that had slaves would still bear a very large grudge, not for a war necessarily, but perhaps they bear a grudge because you capitulated to a foreign power to make these changes within our borders. So there's still some interesting things I can play with, but I'm more interested in the frontier and looking westward, and so I'm changing little things. And so there's a little bit of an alt history aspect to it as well. Uh, but we'll see how that goes. But I had to give the British credit. Um, if there's one thing that the British Empire really, the chief good, one of the chief goods that they did was really eventually putting a complete stop to the visible slave trade globally. When they basically told the world, we're not going to do this anymore. So I got to still give them credit in my alternate history for being the ones, the real force for that.
Um, when you were looking at uh, pushing things beyond the frontier, when this family that the series is focused on, are they some of the first wave of people pushing past the frontier, or do they find a few other people there ahead of them?
Yeah, so I I make reference to the interior, and so that's past this Appalachian mountain change, and that there are um some, let's say, Spanish and French, they have different names in this world. Some Spanish and French holdings in the interior, as actually happened. The French were obviously the main ones with that had land that we came into contact with early, and so there's going some out that way. Although I make reference that they're mostly pulled back in response to this war, and that those populations have dwindled. There are also, in the Appalachian areas, there is a Scotch-Irish inspired people. In the United States, the Scots-Irish, they were um, mostly Presbyterians fleeing Catholic persecution in Ireland, and they lived on the border between the Ireland and Scotland, and they came over in multiple waves in the 1700s, and they were the first European descent folk that really pushed into the Appalachians in multiple different waves. And so when you think about Appalachian men and things like that, you're thinking about the Scotch Irish. You're thinking about the men that came in those waves. They settled mostly in homesteads, very few settlements. They built communities that were spread out over entire counties. Basically, was the community. There wasn't a city. And that's another book I'm reading, is on the Scots Irish, because I need to write more about them in the next book. And so I have these people. The Hamley is what I call them, which is, Hamley is a Scotch Irish phrase for homely, not homely in the negative sense, but homely as in comfortable and established and solid. And so I call them the Hamley. And that's kind of fun playing with them, because they're in these haunted mountains. There's a hint in there that they might just have a professional monster hunting class within their culture that specializes in keeping folks safe. And so, yes, there are some folks out there, but not a lot. Specifically, this this first story largely deals with this military expedition that has been commissioned to reopen passes, since there were French and Spanish holdings on the west side of the mountains, and there were a few little skirmishes early in the war. The passes were ordered closed. They were destroyed by cannon fire, and they've been unused for 10 years. And so this military expedition is repairing the road, clearing out the cannon destroyed passes, and things like that. And that's where they start to run afoul of something that something more mythological that doesn't want them coming westward. One of the things that really made this series snap into focus, whenever I'm thinking about a story, it's kind of this nebulous cloud of ideas, and there's usually a few contact points that really start to condense it. Once you get, there's this lightning point, and here's a lightning point, and here's a lightning point, and how those points suddenly relate to each other. That's what starts condensing that cloud into a much denser network of ideas and plot. And one of the real lightning points for developing this story was when I'm starting to think about the frontier and mythologizing the frontier and the American myth of it. It's like, who is the enemy of the frontier? Who, if Lady Columbia in early American art is often shown pointing a sword westward, directing Americans westward and to go west. It's like, who is the enemy of that? And so that was realizing that there's a villain, there's a personified villain in this series, was the thing that made me go, this is what I want to write. I really want to write this. And of course, these are things I just barely even begin to hint at in this first one. So, don't expect some Dark Lord such and such to show up. But that went back to, again, that idea of me really just wanting to tell a deeply American story. so much fantasy, of course, passes through Tolkien. Obviously, not all of it, but it's, he's the elephant in the room that everyone can't. You can't not be in conversation with him if you're writing, what we traditionally consider fantasy. At least on some level, he's going to be part of the conversation. And and Tolkien really leans into into British myth and British idea. By the time of Tolkien is writing, the height of the British Empire is past. And so there's always this sense in Tolkien that the golden era is already gone. It's already come and gone, and you can't get back to it. And maybe you can find this happy place of equilibrium where we can have peace again, but there's won't be another last alliance of elves and men. That's gone, right? And and that's a very British mindset, whereas the American mindset is always that no, we go westward, we build a brighter tomorrow, the best days are still ahead. That's the American mindset. And so I have to think about how all those things change coming into an American fantasy compared to how people normally think about processing fantasy. So we'll see how it goes. I actually don't know. Okay, you always hear writers talking about how much they're a plotter versus a pantser. How much do they outline a story and how much do they write it by the seat of their pants? Well, I'm like a 2/3 plotter. And obviously things always come up when writing a story and you've got to figure out how to deal with it and adapt to it. But I'm treating the series more like I'm pantsing it. Right? Because I'm letting myself go, okay, I know that those things are out there to the west and I have to get there. But I'm treating it like a frontier for myself too, that I'm going to discover it when I get there. I know a destination. There's an ending to this series, right? There's a final scene, there's an ending destination, there's a conclusion to all of these ideas. But I don't know what's out there in between it. And which is not how I normally write, but I'm kind of keeping it deliberately that way, that I really only know the next book and a half. And I have to go out to the frontier to discover it myself. Maybe that's a little silly, but it makes sense to me. So that's how I'm going to try and write this one.
And one of the things about this period of history too is that it is so sparsely populated by works of fiction in America. I mean, even like movies have barely touched this time period. And even straight novels, not just fantasy novels or whatever, but adventure novels or whatever, even when those were big and the market for them was big, writers didn't very often didn't set books in this time period. Big exceptions were like, okay, you had Little House in the Big Woods, and then Little House on the Prairie, or books that were written during the time period or right after, leading up to the Civil War.
I would say the biggest writer of the time period, the most famous one, is James Fenimore Cooper, who most famously wrote Last of the Mohicans.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest movie from the time period, that the Last of the Mohicans movie from the 90s, which is an excellent adaptation of the era. But that's really the only thing that most people really know from that 1700s frontier.
My bad. Little House in the Big Woods was 1870s. I was completely wrong. I apologize.
That's a later one. It is later. But yeah, it's you're right. It's a largely untapped, and part of it may be that writing about muskets is really inconvenient because muskets completely control the entire pace of action. And so you have to take into account it takes a long time to reload. You fire that shot, and you're out of commission for absolute minimum 20 seconds. I did a lot of reading. I will admit, I have not had the pleasure of firing a black powder weapon before. I have not had the pleasure of getting to actually fire a flintlock. And so I had to do a lot of reading. It was actually kind of funny. I posted to Twitter, I think it was at the beginning of this month, on an edit pass. I found where I made a very slight error in the description of I think I described the flint as striking the pan, and the French flint strikes the frizzen. Yeah. Anyway, I was like, oh no, I got to fix that because I got to get all the firearm stuff correctly because it's so important. Um, but yeah, you have to take into account if your hero has a musket, that is a minimum 20 seconds to fire, probably more in most circumstances. Uh, Usually it's going to be over 30 seconds in a good circumstance. And so, there's a scene real early on where uh, John is trying to reload this musket while something is stalking him in the woods. And this 12-year-old boy who's been trained because, his father's a general. And of course, he's been trained to load it. He's trying to reload it as this thing is bearing down on him. And so you have to build that as part of the fabric of the story and the fabric of all of the action scenes. Oh, and the smoke. That's another thing too, is that you have a group of how you fire a musket in a military situation is in volleys, right? You fire all at once, and that makes a whole lot of smoke. Battlefields get smoky and you can't see and you're coughing. And so, yeah, there's that level of technology makes a big difference. Another thing horses. You got to have a lot of horses. I had a horse girl read it for me to give me some good advice on a couple of scenes. She was like, "Oh, that's okay, but that's how horses in movies work. Here's what horses really do." I was like, "Okay." You write that down and let me add some sentences in there to make that a little more appropriately accurate. So, yeah, I had to do a lot of research for this. It's a great time period. And the funny thing too is because I'm planning on doing this as kind of this generational series, I'm gonna have to do it every few books as the years advance. I'm going to say, okay, what do the 1820s look like now as opposed to the 1780s? What's different? Okay, everybody's got percussion cap rifles now, and so on and so forth. So it'll be an on-running American history project for me. But then also there's there's going to be the folk tale type stuff mixed in as well. I won't spoil the primary antagonist for this first book. It's a little bit of a lesser known Appalachian beastie, but there's this scene early on when something has been stalking the camp and one of the soldiers saw something, and the hunter's going through and listing all the things it can't be. He's like, it's not a Deweyou, it's not a Snallygaster, it's not a Talipo, and of course all of those are real cryptids. So I'm going to chock it full of as much American, as many folk tales, and there'll be some more folklore. There's just going to be. You can't hardly tell. Like I said, you can't tell folk stories without some folklore. But there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it crammed in here. I'm actually planning on. I got to get around to doing this because I got to start getting a final page count here real soon for printing purposes, and that's something else I need to talk about in a minute. But I'm planning on writing a short essay on the backside of a bunch of the real world stuff that I just lifted and tweaked and some stuff like that, because I think will be pretty interesting in some cases. Another reason I'm doing a Kickstarter, talking about printing, is I'm going to do a small print run. I'm not doing print on demand. Okay, paperbacks will be print on demand like normal through Amazon. That's just how indies roll. The hardbacks are going to be an offset print run. I'm going to be getting a few hundred copies. I'm going to be moving a little over 100 at the start. I sell through my website, so I'll sell at events. So I'll sell the others, over the next year or two. But what that means is, they're better quality books. They're going to be sewn bindings instead of glued. And I've got access to a lot more cool stuff. And because economy of scale starts to kick in, I can do some cool stuff without making the book cost much more. I'm going to do gold foiled edges is the one piece of bling. I'm like, that's what I'm going to do because that just has a nice old fashioned feel to me. And something else I didn't mention, the cover. The cover is a gouache painting. And you're probably going, I've never heard of gouache. No one's ever heard of gouache. People have seen the word. It looks like gouache. It's an Italian word. It's the same Jordan Holt, the same artist that's doing the interior. He did the cover. And gouache is it is an opaque water soluble paint, so it works a little bit like watercolor, but it's a lot darker. There's actually quite a few classical era book covers, traditional book covers that are done in gouache. I had no idea. If you think about like early Hardy Boys books, most of those are oil. A lot of them are gouache paintings. So even my cover is real art. It's not digital. So I'm really wanting, I'm offering a paperback. I really want people to take the hardback because it's going to be just a little bit nice. It's only $25 and then shipping. I charge shipping on the backside. Kickstarter says that you do better if you charge shipping up front, but if I charge shipping up front, I have to estimate, which means I have to overcharge you in case shipping changes and for the places where I'm wrong and things like that. So since I'm already set up to ship through my website, I will just do a shipping invoice on the backside, and that will save everybody $3 to $4. I would just rather do it that way than have to overcharge as a precaution. I don't like doing that. So $25 for the hardback. That's what I really want people to get. And I've got some other goodies. I've got like this cool metal coin. Oh, I've got those in. These are really cool. It's like a Republic of Colombia coin with like Habamak Pass, which is the mountain they're trying to clear the pass through. You can't see it very well in that, but it's big. It's like way bigger than a quarter. But and I've got some. The thing with Kickstarter is you always have some higher money tiers because you never know when you have some reader, some follower who happens to have disposable income and they really want to patronize you. Right? Because that's how all the arts used to get done, was patronization. Somebody with a lot of money went to somebody that had talent and said, I want you to make this for me. And then they did. So I'm going to let people patronize illustrations. I've got some higher tiers where if you want to spend $150, you will patronize a half-page illustration. You will get credit in the back. I don't know how exactly I'm going to lay out those pages yet in the back. I've still got to work on that, but you will have permanent credit as the patron of that illustration. You'll get a print of it. And I've got a higher tier beyond that, which is more, but quite a bit more, but the original artist gets paid again. He gets paid more. Where you purchase the original, you paid for the illustration, you're the patron, it shows up in the book forever, and you get sent the original pen and ink art to display or do what you please with. So I've got those options. I've had 6 or 7 where people have sponsored a work. Nobody's purchased an original yet because again, that's kind of pricey, but the option is there if somebody wants it. And so I am at, where am I at? Here's my plea to back it this week so I can get to where I want, 59.28. And if I get to 7,000, I'll do 21 illustrations. I'll probably do more than 16 if I don't quite get there, but I'll have to sit down, do some math, do some accounting, and figure out what I should do and afford. I don't do Kickstarter to make a profit. My stage of writing career is everything is reinvestment. And so Kickstarter for me is exactly what's original intention was. It's a way to bring in capital, bring in that money flow all at once. So I've got the working capital to produce something that then I can turn around and sell for the rest of my life. So yeah, I would love if people would back it. Be really cool. If you just do ebooks, you can grab an ebook as well. They're $5 for an ebook. So Kickstarter ends on Friday night, I think at 9 Central. I don't remember exactly what time, but Friday night. And I think there is a link in the description of this video. So
absolutely there is.
yeah. So check it out. At least take a look. Scroll down and see Jordan Holt's artwork because it's really good. He's really talented. And I was really excited when he was like, yeah, I want to do that project. I was like, yes. Because I was going to be devastated if he couldn't work it into his schedule. Once I learned he was wanting to do everything physical, it's like, this is the guy. This is my guy. So yeah, I've got you can see some of the cover in progress cover shots on the page. You can see the cover without any layout. And then I've got two of the interior illustrations. First the pencil sketches and then ink that are just up on the Kickstarter page. So check them out. And please consider backing.
All right. Well,
oh, and if you happen to like sci-fi westerns more, you can get bundles of my entire other series as add-ons, including the first 2 audiobooks. I only have the first 2 in audio. Audiobooks are very expensive for indies, and I'm working through that. I got to make all those decisions carefully so I don't, dry up that money, that bank account and kill the money flow. So, but I've got 2 in audiobook. You can get those through the Kickstarter. Happy for you to do that too. If you're more into science fiction, you can grab that and support the campaign as well.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show, talking about your Kickstarter. It's been a great show. Very interesting to talk about the Musket Fantasy, and I'm looking forward to this book and to the rest of the series. I want to thank everyone who listened live. I want to thank everyone who will listen later when we get this uploaded to the podcast. By the way, we are now uploading again to the podcast. 2 weeks ago's episode with Larry Correa was the first episode of the podcast we got out since the new year, since our lineup change. So if you are, look, we've already got somebody who's backed. So,
well, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So everybody listening, take a look at the Kickstarter back. It does sound like a great book. It sounds like a great series, and check out everything else while you're there. Here's a dirty little secret. I managed to harass Mr. Kane into putting up the coins as an add-on you could buy, not just something from one of the higher end tiers. So,
you know what? Definitely, if you ever do a Kickstarter and want something like that, always check, because people running Kickstarters are happy to find ways for you to give them money. I've got somebody that they're kind of talking and wanting to buy multiple copies of the book as a giveaway. And they're like, how do we do that? I was like, let me know how many. I'll create an item just for you and give you a couple bucks discount if you're buying multiple copies. So definitely always ask the guy running the Kickstarter, because he'll say, yes, you can give me money. I'll make it happen.
So anyways, I lost my place. No, thanks everybody for tuning in live. Thanks everyone who will tune in later. We're finally getting the podcast back up and running, so you can subscribe on your Android device, subscribe on your Apple device, subscribe, just download it to a computer, available on the device of your choices. Or of course, we're available youtube.com/geekgab, youtube.com/geekgab, just about every week. 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. This has been Geek Gab for Monday, July 27th, 2026. I'm your host, Daddy Warpig. Don't you worry. Don't you fret. I am signing off for today, but I will be back.
Thanks for